Okay, everybody, I just have to let you know that the meeting is being recorded and it will be available through the Key Biscayne Condominium President's Council and the Village of Key Biscayne, so that people who didn't make it for whatever reason will be able to view it at a later time. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. We have I think a really interesting program. We're very happy to have with us Javier Highland, who will start off with a very interesting presentation of the latest Key Biscayne voter demographics. Javier is a Senior Director of Finance, Planning, and Analysis for Visa Latin America. And he's compiled some really interesting slides. And so I will now turn the meeting over to him for his presentation, and then we'll enter the main part of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you very much. I believe that you can see my screen. So here today, we're going to see a little bit of what's going on in terms of voter registration. And we're going to make a lot of comparison between single family house and condo, and also probably more importantly, what happened during the last few years in Key Biscayne. There's a lot going on. So let me get right into it. If there's one slide that I wanted to remember, is this one. First of all, surprise to no one, is that we're growing in the island. We're really growing. Not only population, which is another topic, but also we're growing registered voters. In other words, in 2014, we had 6,500 registered voters. Right now, in October 2020, we have 7,000, almost 900. 7,000, almost 900 voters, which is a lot. That's an increase of 21% in the last 6 years. If I only look at the last 2 years, if I compare 18 versus 2020, the increase in total voter registration was 9%, a lot. Now, here in blue, you can see the condo registrations. Here you can see the single family registrations, also surprise to no one, were the majority. But what's important to you is during the last 6 years, the condos, we increased by about 25%, while the single families increased about 12.5% for a combined overall increase in voter registration of 21%. Here you see a little chart showing that the condos represent about 65%, and single family, due to rounding, is 36%. In reality, it should be 35%, but we do have some rounding here. So that's very, very important. Again, condos are the majority of the registered voters, 65%, and we're growing the fastest. Yeah. The second one, if we look at total Key Biscayne political party registration, we all know that the island is mostly Republican. Absolutely, it is more Republican than Democrat, but the advantage is shrinking, and it's shrinking fast. In 2016, the Republicans were 34% of the registered voters, the Democrats 25%, and the Independents 40%. That 40% is very similar, statistically equal to 39% here. But if you look at the Republicans, they lost 3 shares, and the Democrats pick up 4 points of share in the last 4 years, at the expense mostly of the Republicans, a little bit of the Independents. So right now, if you take a picture of Key Biscayne, not only we grew in terms of total voter registration, but Democrats now become really, really, really close to the Republicans. The difference is about only 154 registrations, about 2%, and that's the 2% that you see here, no? From the 31 to the 29. So once again, here the takeaway is, yes, the island technically is still more Republican than Democrat, but it's almost 50-50, almost there in between one and the other. And of course, the Independents are still the largest segment. Now, if I do the same thing, exactly the same thing, but I open into condo and single family, I can tell you that from 16 to 2020, we did have some variations. For example, Democrats used to be 26%, now it's 29%. Democrats in single family house used to be 22%, now it's 29%. I'm happy to report, and I actually like this very much because I see this as one single island, we're together. Right now, the demographics in terms of a political affiliation, it's the same, almost the same between condo and single family. Yeah. So that's the conclusion here. While there have been a lot of changes, again, Republicans tended to be more in single families, and Democrats tended to be more in condo. Right now, as it stands in 2020, we have exactly, or almost exactly, if you take for this 32% versus 31, we look the same. In other words, in terms of political registration, which is, to me, is good news, A, and B, this democratization of the island that is happening. If these trends continue, very likely we're going to be even with the Republican very soon. In fact, it might be even this year, in 2020, with all this new registration happening. Now, if I move into how actually people voted, we know that in 2016 was the national election, and we know that in 2018 was the midterm, the so-called midterm election. We also know that in the national election, more people actually show up to vote than in a midterm election. So it's normal to lose a little bit of votes between one and the other. What's important to you here to know is, during the 2016 election and also during the 2018 election, both for condo and single family, most of the votes were cast way before the election day. Whether it was mail-in, 35, 36%, 32, 35, or early voter, 38 in the case of the presidential election. A lot of people voted here, and actually less people voted, and again, 38 here, less people voted in early voting in the midterm than in the presidential one. And you can see here, actually a lot of people waited to the actual election date on the midterm, presumably because there's less lines and it's easier to vote than on the presidential election. They prefer to vote by mail. In other words, and I'm surprised about this, that the actually 33% of the voters cast their ballot in 2018, up from 30% or 28% in 2016. To me, this is very insightful. I expect in the 2020 election, a lot, due to COVID-19, a lot more people to vote by mail, though there is a maximum of 40%, because the vote by mail right now in Key Biscayne, as it stands, 40% of the registered voters are mail-in. So there's a mathematical cap as how much people can actually vote via mail-in. I expect also a lot of early voters and not so much people voting in the day of the elections, but who knows? We have to see. We have to see exactly what's happening. That's what I think, but we have to see that, and we will have the information after the election. Of course, we will have the actual election of how it was turned out, and I'll refresh this analysis at that time. This slide shows you registration and voting percentage. In other words, condo registrants, 64, 63, 64.5. This is the 65% that you saw over there. And when I show you this 36%, it's really 35.5 and rounded. So what's important to you to know here is, condo, of course, where the majority of the registration. And also, we vote almost in the same ratio as single family. So if you see here, 35.5 are registered, and they become 36.3 of the votes in 18. We are 64.5% of the registration and 63.7% of the actual votes. So I could say that single family and condos, they vote almost in the same ratio as our registration. Where, to put it nicely, single families and condos are as likely to vote. Now, let's become, and I know that Mike Davis on the call, so let's be very specific with the data. Mike Davis here, as we all know, beat Luis Lucho de la Cruz by about 500 votes. Yeah, during the last contest, he got overall 55.6% of the votes. We know that. What we might not know is how the voters actually came in. You know, Mike Davis had a big advantage for the mail-in ballots, significant advantage, and also he kept the advantage for early in the election day. Yeah, 55-55. But he had two more points during the mail-in registrations, if you will. Yeah, Why? I do not know. I know facts, but I do not know. We do not know why, and also we do not know exactly who voted. Of course, no, that's secret. But we know very well the votes that came during different how it was voted. To me, this is important because if somebody has a lead early on, and we can today in Miami-Dade, as you know, on the 19th of this Monday, October 19th, opens the early voting, and the mailing is already it's already in. I already voted, and my vote has already been counted, and those numbers are public. So I know that there's some candidates here on the call today, and it's very easy to know how they're doing. So we can reconstruct this, or try to reconstruct this particular bar, and we can infer, if nothing changes statistically, how they're going to land already. This is for the 3 council members elected. I know that, of course, Ignacio is here present. So we know that in that case, in that particular election, the top 3 got elected out of 5. Now is top 3 out of 10, as we know. And here's Ignacio Segurola with 28.85% of the votes. What's important here, if I open the percentage here, and if I look at the way people voted, unlike Mike Davey, I do not see a statistically significant difference between mail-in ballot, early voting, or election day. Yeah. So why is this important again? Because technically, I could go here to Doral, to the election committee in Doral, and ask them, hey, we want to see how you're counting the mail-in ballots and how many you have, and let me see exactly the representation. And we can see very well, if we wanted to the top 10 candidates to see how they're doing, and potentially make a difference on early voting or election day based on what we see. If we see that a particular candidate is not doing well, we could tell him already. He doesn't have to wait until election day to see that he or she is not performing properly. We have a lot more. This is just an appetizer, but unfortunately we are limited by time. Let me stop here and pass the baton back to Tony. Thank you, Tony.
Javier, thank you very much. That was really fascinating data, and I'm sure Mike Davey really enjoyed that large percentage vote when he ran for mayor. I want to just, this was kind of a teaser. Javier is going to be putting together all of the data for the 2020 election, and we'll be holding a special meeting where he'll go into much more depth. There are a whole bunch of more slides that are really fascinating about how people move in terms of demographics. They start out in a condo, then they'll move to a single family home, and then they'll come back to a condo, and that whole process is very interesting from the point of view of how how people view the village. So we'll be doing that in a future presentation. I want to introduce everybody who's here in the panel. Fausto Gomez is our Vice President of the Key Biscayne Condominium President's Council from the Ocean Club. Michelle Estevez is our Executive Director for the President's Council, and they will be helping me out on the panel with any questions as we move forward. So right now we're up to 73 attendees, so which is not as many people as actually registered, but that's a very good turnout. It's bigger than the meals we used to have over at the Ocean Club. So thank you for coming without steak and potatoes and wine. Okay. The format for tonight is going to be first our mayor, Mike Davey, is going to present his views on infrastructure in the village and how we're going to finance it. And then Ignacio Segurola will have equal time. Then we'll open it up for questions. As you listen to them, you can go ahead and formulate your questions, put them in under the Q&A. I see that already we have 6 questions lined up. So, as you're hearing something and you want more details, just put in the question. And then once they both speak, we'll open it up and we'll start dealing with the questions. Each speaker will get equal time in responding to the questions. So, Mike, go ahead and take it over, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody who's attending. I appreciate the opportunity. I think this is great that you all are doing this. I appreciate Ignacio coming with the other side. I think one of the most important things before I begin is just that I want people to remember we're one community. You know, Ignacio's got his views and I've got my views, but both of us, our goal is to do what's best for the community, the Village of Key Biscayne. And that's what we're trying to strive to. So that at the end of the day, whether or not this passes, I want people to remember that we're all working for what's good, what's best for Key Biscayne. There's been a lot of talk about the general obligation bonds or the GOB issue. There's some folks claiming that voting for the GOBs gives a blank check to the village council. They further claim that the projects are not fully ready and that the GOB issue is premature. Respectfully, I disagree. The question before the voters on November 3rd is simple. Do we want the village council to be able to consider a financing option that could provide a better, less expensive way of financing debt for critically needed infrastructure projects? Approving the GOBs does not give the council any authority with regard to issuing debt that it does not already have. The village council right now has the power to incur debt for the village. We can improve all of the projects we're contemplating without using GOBs. But without GOBs, the projects will be more expensive because of debt service. The charter process to approve and finance projects is not altered in any way by approving the use of GOBs. That charter approved process affords all the public input and safeguards that have allowed us to complete numerous projects in the past. Our charter also protects us against bad council decisions with the right to petition, a petition-driven referendum of council decisions. So that is, if we decide after the council's approved on second reading an ordinance to fund something, you have 30 days to bring a petition to overturn that decision. That's always been in existence and that will continue. There's no need to have individual votes on each project. If there's any concern with a specific project, a referendum process to stop it still exists, and it already exists and it will continue to exist. Now, why do we want the GOB to go before the voters of Key Biscayne? Under Florida law, the village cannot issue GOBs without a vote of the electorate. The village can issue revenue bonds without any such votes. But GOBs, again, offer lower interest rates over longer terms, thus reducing annual debt service. That is the issue before you on election day. Do you want the council to be able to consider a cheaper way to finance needed projects? Now, voting for the GOBs does not commit the village to doing any specific project, even though several are ready to move forward, including beach projects, stormwater projects, and undergrounding of utilities. But in approving the use of GOBs, we are showing our resolve as a community to tackle much needed, long discussed infrastructure projects that we know will improve our island and raise our property values. Every project being contemplated will still have to be vetted before council with stringent specificity, whether or not we use GOBs. Before we issue any individual bond, we will specifically define what each tranche will be used for and the terms under which we will take on that debt. Again, while we do not need to have shovel-ready projects to simply approve, considering the use of GOBs, we have projects that have reached the point where it is impractical to proceed any further without deciding on how we will finance those projects. Without understanding our financing options and how we would fund a project, it would be irresponsible to start the planning project, to do more planning, to do the design process. It would be fiscally irresponsible because it would incur hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in engineering and other soft costs to get to the point where we are ready to put the proverbial shovels in the ground. Hopefully, as we go through the process of approving different projects, our residents will take part in those deliberations and voice their suggestions and concerns on each and every one of them. It is, after all, our community, our island, our Key Biscayne. Going back to my original point, the question before the voters is simple. Do you want the village council to be able to consider a financing option that can provide a better, less expensive way of financing debt for critically needed infrastructure projects? If you do, you should vote for the bonds. Thank you.
Here.
Tony, you're pulling in at London.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much, Mike. Ignacio, you are next. And again, everybody, if you hear something that catches your attention, that you need more clarification, this is the time to write a little question and submit it. So I will now begin with Ignacio Segurola, council member of the Village of Key Biscayne.
First, I'd like to start off also by thanking the condo presidents. I think it's a fantastic organization. I'm very happy that this forum has been opened up to the village as a whole. I think it is great that whether you live in a condo or in a single family home, everyone is getting the opportunity to partake in this discussion, to ask questions. If there is a silver lining in this whole coronavirus thing, is that through Zoom, we have all been able to communicate better. And I think that that's a good thing. So thank everyone on the panel. Thank everyone that's watching. Like Mike said a few minutes ago, I think as attorneys that he and I both are, we both, it might be counterintuitive, but healthy debate is a good thing. That's how you hopefully arrive at the truth. And that is what we're here to do, hopefully. And we are here to openly discuss our opinions, have people ask questions, and then arrive at their own conclusions. Now, for my presentation, I did prepare a slideshow with a few points. I'll be honest, it's the first time that I'll be sharing my screen, so please let me know if this works or not. Here we go. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okie doke. Now, just say no to the bond. Fallacies being used to sell the bond. I use the word fallacies that was very carefully chosen because a fallacy, the definition is a mistaken belief based on unsound argument. I believe that a lot of the arguments being presented in favor of the bond are fallacies, and I'll explain why. First fallacy that we hear very common. This is what other cities have done. This is how it's done. The main example that's used is the city of Miami Beach. If experience and analysis shows what we are doing is exactly the opposite of what the city of Miami Beach did in 2018. In summary, city of Miami Beach in 2018 decided they wanted to do their own resiliency bonds. They wanted to have it in the November 18 election. Beginning in February 2018, 9 months before, as you can see here, and I'll make these slides available to anybody that would like. This is taken, by the way, directly from the City of Miami Beach website. Beginning in February 2018, the mayor created a citizens advisory panel, held a series of workshops. They began with a wish list of $1.1 billion in projects. And between February and November, they whittled that down to $439 million in projects for 57 separate identified projects with realistic estimates. By the way, the $439 million bond that they passed, which passed with a 70% approval rate, is 69.53% of their budget. It is not 300% of the budget like we're seeing here in Key Biscayne. But as you can see, the work that the city of Miami Beach put into preparing the information, preparing the projects, preparing the estimates prior to the election is the exact opposite that the village of Key Biscayne has done. Number two, this only gives the council the option to use the GO bonds, which are cheaper than revenue bonds. This is a disingenuous argument because it implies that this is a do or die situation, that if we don't do this now, we can never use GO bonds in the future. That is simply wrong. We can present a referendum for a GO bond at any time that there's an election, which is regularly scheduled every 2 years. We can even do it in a special election, which is not necessary for a reason that I'll explain a little later on. But a GO bond has always been available to the public, to the Key Biscayne, and always will be available in the future. There is nothing will happen if this bond is rejected now.
Half a minute left.
I'm going to need a lot more time, Tony. If you want, I'll use all my time for rebuttal later. I can give it to Mike.
Okay, well, if it's okay with Mike, any time that Ignacio goes over, we'll add on to your time. If that's okay
I'll be
with you.
happy.
I'll be able to respond. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Now, with regard to the fact that the village can always get into debt, issue revenue bond now, that's also disingenuous because revenue bonds are secured by revenue streams. The village does not have any sort of revenue stream that would allow it to get $100 million in revenue bonds. That's just simply not possible. We still won't use the full 100 million because we can't exceed the debt cap. Well, that's not exactly accurate either. The debt cap fluctuates. In 2010, the assessed values in Key Biscayne was $5.7 billion. Today, it's approximately $8.2 billion. In another 10 years, it could very easily reach $100 billion. The debt cap is 1%. If it reaches $100 billion, we can get $100 million in the credit line used all at once. And if it surpasses that amount, not only can a future council use up the entire 100 million, but any additional debt through revenue bonds gets added on top of that. So we are in over $100 million in debt on a currently $34 million budget. Number 4, approving the GO bond sends a message to home buyers and investors that we care about protecting our investments for the long run. On the contrary, it's going to create uncertainty. It'll scare off buyers and investors because people don't like uncertainty and not knowing what's going to happen in the future. There's no telling what a council could do to pass any amount of bonds at any time or how high the taxes may need to go to service the debt. Number 5, council will listen to residents before voting, and voters can always ask for a referendum pursuant to the charter. This is brought to you by the same council members who thought medicinal marijuana dispensaries on Key Biscayne was a good idea. This flips the argument around. The burden of enforcing best practices is not on the residents, it's on the council. Best practices for the council to follow on a daily basis. It is not up to the council to tell residents, if you don't like what we're doing, you have 30 days to challenge us. That's not the way it works. We are the public servants. The public should not have to be checking our behavior whenever through an expensive and complicated legal process, whenever the council does something the voters don't want. Number 6, projects on the horizon require GO bond funds are undergrounding, beach renourishment, and raising the streets. I recently wrote an article about that in the Islander. Undergrounding is stalled. The manager in yesterday's meeting said things are looking very good for the village being included in the Army Corps coastal plan so that we won't have to use as much, if any, funds from the village for beach renourishment. And with regard to raising the streets, I've spoken to many single-family homeowners, and everyone that I've spoken to directly is against raising the streets because their houses are going to get flooded. Now, whether that's true or not is not the point. The point is this emphasizes and points out the lack of planning and analysis by the village before throwing that out there for people to look at. Number 7, voodoo math. All of the numbers that are heard about what's it going to cost, how much it's going to raise your taxes, what's going to happen with your yearly tax bill, it's voodoo math. There is no way of knowing that. No one knows how much money is going to be taken out, when it'll be taken out, at what interest rate, and for what project. And not only that, but there's another point. Every lender that I've ever seen in my life, as you get further and further into debt, the interest rate starts going up. So it's not that you get the cheapest rate available for $1 as you do for $100 million. So all those numbers, it's a selling point. It's not reality. Number 8, bonds won't be issued for years, so don't worry about it. I also call this the stop asking questions and just give us the money argument. If bonds won't be used for years because there are no projects available for years, why are we rushing into this now? Why don't we wait till 2022 or 2024? What are the truths about the bond? No one knows what the interest rates are that we'd end up paying. Voting against the bond does not mean you're against resiliency. It just means you're asking questions and you want to know what you're getting into before you start paying for it. There are no resiliency projects waiting for this funding. That's just not the case. There is nothing ready or nothing even close to being ready. You're talking 3-4 years minimum before anything's ready. The only thing one big bond will do is eliminate the voters' check and balance on the council. Only the council will be in the driver's seat and the voters will have nothing to say about it. So all these points that I've said are negative. So what's the positive? What should the village do for resiliency? We need to put in the work. It's what we should have done, which is the exact opposite of what Miami Beach did. We need to create an initial wish list of specific projects. We need to create a citizens advisory panel to investigate and work with the council and with the public to analyze what projects we need. We need to direct the manager to create realistic cost estimates for the projects. We need to hold workshops to engage the public. We need to analyze what all the other funding options are for the different projects that we would like to do. And then, just like Miami Beach did when it started with $1.1 billion on their wish list, whittle down the projects to a realistic, prioritized list with realistic estimates so that we're not going for pie in the sky numbers of 100 or $150 million. The real question to the voters, for me, is do you want only future unknown councils to have full reign on $100 million you will have to pay? That's what it comes down to. $100 million on unknown projects, unknown costs, at unknown times, that's going to be voted on by unknown councils. That is just simply too much to ask of the voters of Key Biscayne. And for all those reasons, I say, let's do this right, let's do this smart, and let's start off by voting no on the bond in November. Thank you.
Okay, Ignacio, thank you very much. Mike, you have 6 minutes and 11 seconds of extra time, which you can either use now or during your final statement.
I guess I'll respond to a couple of the points.
Hold on, let me just start you, okay?
Let me know. Start
Go
your
ahead.
engines. We
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
you know, Councilmember Cigarola, you mentioned 3 to 4 years. In fact, we are at the point with undergrounding of utilities. We've got a master plan. We could, in fact, go out to bid next fall. We are simply, the reason we're waiting is to submit for design. You know, and if we're going to submit for design, we're essentially as shovel ready as we're going to get without doing that design. I've talked to our experts who are telling me that's what we have to do. And that costs hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million to do. So we need to know how we're going to fund these projects before we go forward. And that one project is ready to go. You brought up the flooding, or rather you said you're raising the streets. There's a number of different ways to do flooding mitigation. We've been talking about them in council meetings. You've been there, you've attended, you've watched. Also, our projects aren't 57 because they're really just 3 tranches. You've got hardening of our infrastructure, you've got floodwater mitigation, and you've got beaches. And as you said, look, in the best case scenario, the Army Corps of Engineers is going to approve our projects. But we can't plan on that right now. We've got to assume right now that we may be called upon to spend our dollars. I think we're all in favor of having the Corps take it over, but if they don't, what are we going to do? Are we going to be ready to respond to that eventuality, that possible eventuality? You know, you said we're doing the opposite. We haven't been planning. We've had a myriad of town halls. Undergrounding has been, you were on the undergrounding task force. We did a myriad of town halls on that. We've done a myriad on stormwater, and we will continue to do these things, but we know what has to be done. This is simply, again, voting to allow us to consider general obligation bonds is not approving a bond. It's not saying here's $100 million go with one bond. I don't know why that idea keeps popping around. The fact is, if we as a council decided to do it with a supermajority, we could, in fact, take on debt for the village right now. Unfortunately, we'd have to use revenue bonds, which are more expensive. That's what this is about. We have to go back to that. It's not about, this whole idea that geo bonds are that much different. It just, Florida state law requires a vote of the electorate to use them. You brought up not trusting future councils, and you've used that before, and respectfully, I'm disappointed because, we as a community have always always put up good people on council. We are an incredibly informed electorate. We pay attention to who we put up there. We pay attention to what they do. And I expect that when I'm off council, I will continue to take part in council meetings. I will continue to watch and see what people do, as everybody here is doing. And that's our job as voters. That's our jobs as members of the community, to make sure that we are doing everything to monitor what our elected representatives in a representative democracy do. But to have all the projects go out to a vote every time, it's cumbersome. It's non-effective. I mean, Athenian democracy was the demise of Athens. We have a representative democracy. It's been working. We have the lowest tax rates in Miami-Dade County. We have incredibly effective services. We are an incredibly efficient, despite what some people would say, government for our size. We do a heck of a job. And I don't mean, you know, I say we as if there's been so many people who are part of this government, and the voters are part of this government, and we make this happen. So I think we need to trust future councils to do what's right, because we're going to be watching. We're going to be part of making the decision as to who we put up in what the seats you and I occupy right now, to make the decisions on what projects go forward. All of these projects we're talking about are critical. You made the comment that to the contrary, it will scare off people to put a GO. I can think of no better way. There was an article in the New York Times, I happened to be in it on Monday or Sunday, that talked about concerns about the housing market and climate change. Well, the fact is, if we're ahead of the curve and we're out there and we're doing things like hardening our infrastructure, if we're taking care of flooding, if we're protecting our shoreline, we're going to be seen as leaders in the market. We're going to be seen as a community people are going to want to come to. You know, you talk about, we don't know what the costs are, the voodoo math. I don't know what that is. What you do is you take historic data and you run the numbers. If we could, and as you point out, if our values go up and we can issue $100 million in debt, that means for a home with a taxable value of $1 million, assuming interest rates stay at a constant or move a little bit, in a conservative form, that house would be paying an additional $640 in taxes on an annual basis to have all the flood mitigation we need, the hardening of infrastructure, and shoreline protection. $640, that's about $51 a month as an investment in our community. That means our flood insurance costs go down. That means our property values go up. And really, that's the point of this whole exercise, protecting our property. So the things, you know, you spoke of, we've been over them, you know, a few times on dais. I just respectfully disagree. I think GO bonds make the most sense, because our choices are revenue bonds or GO bonds. Those are the ways to do it. We're moving forward with the projects. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'd ask you the question. Are you against any of the infrastructure projects we're talking about? Are you against the shoreline protection? Are you against the undergrounding of utilities? Are you against the flood water mitigation? Because if that's the position, then that's a different argument. But if we're going to do projects, if we're really going to be committed as a community, and we could begin in fourth quarter of 21, or let's say we wait until second quarter of 22 because we want to incorporate some other projects that deal with floodwater mitigation. We can get these things done while you and I are both sitting on the dais. We can do things. We can make things happen. You and I both ran to make things happen. This is our opportunity, and our choice is revenue bonds or GO bonds. That's what we get to choose between. Thanks.
Okay, Mike, you only ran over 30 seconds. That's quite amazing. Okay, let's open it up now for questions. I see that we have a number of questions. Let's take a look at it for our panel, if you would help me with it. Okay. First question is from Jed Kurlanchik, and the question is, and it's to both of you, what process was used to arrive at 100 million? And then there's a follow-up question. I guess I should, for the projects that have been identified, with the exception of beach renourishment and the burying of the power lines, what process was used to develop their costs? So it's a cost-related, and then well, I'll let you answer those first. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do them one by one.
Yeah. Okay. The first one is, what process was used to arrive at the 100 million?
If the mayor
Okay,
wants to go first.
Okay, either one. I mean, that was our staff came up with those estimates based on what we've been talking about. You know, undergrounding utilities, those numbers came out of Kimley Horn's study. The flood mitigation came out of different projects that, you know, we've sort of been doing estimates on things, and our director of public works and our chief resiliency officer came up with that. And then we had the beach, we have Moffett and Nichols and our folks over for the beach renourishments and Shoreline Protection Act that sort of have given us some rough numbers on what those projects would cost.
Ignacio?
I have a different take on how the number was arrived at. The first time that the GEO bond was ever really discussed in council was about a year ago when former Mayor Alan Fine spoke during public comments, and he said that the village should consider going out for a GEO bond for a bunch of projects, and the number he threw out was 150 million at that time. After that time, I think that number shocked a lot of people. So it was whittled down to, first, I think the number was come up with first, and then projects were thrown in there to justify the amount. Again, the cart before the horse. I think, in my opinion, that the estimates that were created, or not estimates, it's actually really more back of the napkin numbers that were thrown together, have no concrete basis in reality, as definitely at least not to the level of effort that was put in by the city of Miami Beach when they came up with their numbers for the bond. So I personally, I don't trust those numbers too much.
I mean, respectfully, Ignacio, you missed the strategic meeting, and that was where we discussed in detail the projects.
And at that time, the numbers were already set. That the strategic meeting was about 5-6 months after Mr. Fine spoke at council, and it was already rolling. It was already rolling at that time. Very disappointingly, in my opinion.
Okay, shall we go to the next question, and then you can, you know,
I don't know how to answer that.
you can circle back. So
Okay.
the next question is, excuse me, for the projects that have been identified, with the exception of beach renourishment and the burying of the power lines, what process was used to develop their costs? I think you really covered that.
Yeah.
Same answer.
Yeah, and then the last one is, with the exception of the beach renourishment and the burying of the power lines, what are the other projects? I think you addressed that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the next one down. From Frank and Lourdes. How much more would it cost to do 3 GEO bonds, one for each project, compared to 1 GEO bond for the whole thing? Ignacio, you want to start, and then Mike?
Well, I think there's 2 separate individual costs. Number one is the cost of the election, which is a cost that's been discussed as being cumbersome. Why have, you know, referendums every time for different projects? So if you do one big bond, yes, you save that because you just have one big referendum. Now, with regard to the issuance of the bonds, every time the council will issue a tranche, as it's been called, there are going to be whatever origination costs there are. That's basically as far as it goes. How much are the origination fees, for lack of a better term? That depends on the amount that's pulled out. So I don't think those numbers exist. And Mayor can correct me if I'm wrong, but it all depends again on variables that we just don't know the answers to.
So first on how much would it cost for 3 GEO bonds? It's about 40 to 50,000 per election, as I understand it. Plus you've got the education component, because you want to educate people and let them know, because again, people are upset about this one. You know, if you go out and now you've got a special election on something like this, you've got to educate people, and that can be costly. Tell Councilmember Laredo we're going to hire a consultant to do these things for us. He'll be doing backflips. But as to the costs of the actual issuance of bonds, it does, as the council member said, it depends. But again, it's apples to apples. Revenue bonds or general obligation bonds, it's the same cost. If you're going into the public market, it's going to cost more for any bond you put in the public market, but that's the same for revenue bonds as opposed to GEO bonds. So the costs there are the same. A bond is a bond is a bond. I've checked with municipal bond people. I've got a buddy at Fitch Ratings, and I confirmed that that's that's accurate. So whatever we do in terms of, if we're going to issue bonds, the costs are going to be very similar. With regard to having geo bond referendums, you're talking $50,000 each time. And again, it's education and everything else that goes into it. So you're looking, you're looking over $200,000 to issue these things, when hopefully we're educating people and we're getting to a point where they understand this is simply another financing vehicle. There's nothing different about this. There'll be no changes to the process other than allowing us to use it.
Okay, I'm going to jump down to a question from Jorge Mendia. And he's asking, isn't the 100 million number actually a ceiling on what this approval of geo bonds does in case the debt cap goes up beyond the 100 million, as Mr. Segurola said might happen? Okay, Ignacio, you want to comment on that? And then Mike, Mike first. Yeah, Mike, you go first.
I'll go first. We'll just alternate. It is it is a ceiling. I forgot to, I guess I forgot to mention that when you said, yes, if our property values, assessed value, go to say $10.1 billion, our cap on this would still be at 100 million for issuance of general obligation bonds. And again, they can only be for certain projects. They can only be for hardening of infrastructure, flood mitigation, or beaches, shoreline protection. So we've curtailed them to a specific areas that we're going to focus on with these general obligation bonds, which is the right way to do it.
Yes, it would be a ceiling for this bond. However, as the mayor pointed out, the council could incur additional revenue bond debt at any point in time. So you can very foreseeably have $1 million in geo bond debt from this referendum, plus additional revenue bond debt from other projects that pop up in the future. So if the debt cap goes up to $120 million, because we have 120 billion in assessed value, you can surpass the $100 million. That's my understanding of the math. The $100 million is just for this revenue bond. Just this general obligation bond alone. And with regard to what the mayor said, that it can only be used for certain specific things, well, that's part of the problem. We really don't know what the projects are. They haven't been identified. We have these general broad categories. Well, you can pretty much plug in a quote unquote resiliency component or element to any project whatsoever and suddenly say, oh, now this qualifies for the geo bond. So, and the only one that will have the right to vote on that will be the council. It won't be the electorate. It won't be the voters. So again, where everyone's left in limbo, where it's been called a blank check. It can be. I sort of agree with that. I liken it more to a pre-approved credit line to be used at the sole discretion of council, because once it passes, the council decides when to take out the money, how much, and what for.
Can I ask, council member, couldn't we just do that with revenue bonds right now?
No, because there is no revenue stream that will cause any lender to lend us $100 million. So no,
respectfully, I disagree. We could actually, we can do the bonds. No, that we can't do $100 million, not 100 million. We can do right now. We can do $67 million in revenue bonds. We can. I've talked to I'm telling you, this is fact.
And any lender will ask what the revenue stream is. And
the revenue stream is our ad valorem. It's our taxes. I mean, the money that we're bringing in as revenues, that's what pays our revenue. I mean, I don't know how to tell you this.
I disagree. I don't think it's that possible to get it's easy for the council to get into 67 million or $100 million of revenue bond debt. I think the end around run is the general obligation. You get this referendum, you get it passed, and suddenly that's it. You have a credit line.
We have $9 million in ad valorem. We can pledge the use of that to pay the debt.
Correct, $9 million. That's true. I don't think a lender will give us $100 million for $9 billion in.
Well, they won't, because we have a debt cap, so we couldn't go to 100 million.
Or 67 million.
Okay, guys, let me stop here so that we can.
60 million right now.
Then we can go to another question. The question is, would the mayor and council members each please explain what specifically is different in the process for the council advancing any individual project if we do or do not have the general obligation bond funding? How would it differ in terms of how we approach the projects? I think is the question.
Who goes first?
I think my turn.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't think there's any difference. Basically, if the referendum is rejected, we can continue on to do things the right way, if you ask me. We can identify the projects, do a citizens advisory panel, come up with realistic estimates, and present a referendum for another general obligation bond with more specificity in 2 years or 4 years, or however, or whenever we're closer to having real information. Now, the mayor said something earlier that it was presented a false choice. It's either you're for revenue bonds or you're for general obligation bonds or you're against everything. That's not the case. I'm for general obligation bonds. I'm just for doing them the right way. This is, in my opinion, a textbook example of how not to do a general obligation bond, which is basically just give us the money and we'll figure it out later. That's not the way to do this.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so yes, I agree with Councilmember Segarola to the point of there is really no difference if we have geo bonds or we don't have geo bonds. If it passes, we're going to continue to do the projects very methodically, very specifically. We're going to make sure we're doing everything the way we've been doing them for 29 years, and we hopefully will continue for another 29 years. To the point, we have the right to incur the debt of at least 60 million right now on revenue bonds. We don't need to go out to another vote. And I don't understand. It's just a mechanism. And the safeguard, again, I want to reiterate, this community has always been involved in what we do. They come to the town halls, they come to the charrettes, to the workshops, they pay attention. These projects have all been done. There's been town halls on undergrounding, on flood mitigation, on beaches since time immemorial. I mean, I know they were going on when I moved here, when I got involved in 2003, 2004. So to say that we haven't been planning, we haven't been talking, we've got plans and plans and plans. And your idea of having a referendum just kicks the can down the road. What you're doing is you're postponing us from starting projects. And another point I just want to bring up is, the longer we wait, right now, we're cutting edge almost. If we start moving along on these things, if we start doing the things we want to do, we're ahead of the curve in terms of issuing bonds for these mitigation issues. But if we're now 4 or 5 years down the line, now when we go out to market for these bonds, we're competing with a lot of other coastal and other communities that have finally gotten their heads out of the sand and realized, oh crap, I better do something. There's going to be a lot of projects. The county is talking about getting off septic, right? There are other communities all over Florida that are talking about getting onto sewers. Those are big projects. There's going to be muni bonds flowing out there, and we're going to have to compete against that to get the money. And as credit markets dry up, we're going to be stuck in a tough position. That's why I would like to see us, as you and I campaigned for, getting things done now. I think we've been very diligent in what we've done as a community. I think we've been very diligent as council members, and I think we're moving the ball along properly. We waited on undergrounding because we were hoping we would get FP&L to take it and run with it on their own. It looks like they won't. We're going to continue to work with them, but we have to prepare for the possible eventuality that we're going to have to take that over. Otherwise, they're going to stick those poles all over town, those huge concrete things, and those are going to hurt our property values. Those are going to look hideous. They're not going to do what Key Biscayne wants. We want to do and again, it goes to the flooding mitigation, it goes to the beach renourishment and the shoreline protection. We need to get going now on projects, not wait 2, 4, 6 years down the road. That's my response. But short answer, it's really not going to change between revenue and geo bonds.
Okay, before you go on, Ignacio, one of the questions that was raised is what impact would the the geo bonds have on the village's credit rating? The current credit rating is AAA, is that correct?
That's great. Yeah.
So you can comment on anything, but let's answer that question.
Who knows? As
Yeah,
as it starts going up and you start getting more in debt and you're issuing bonds for 300% of your annual budget, who knows?
Again, respectfully, you're talking issuing debt. Our annual budget's 36 million. We're not issuing debt we're not issuing bonds for 115 or 105 million dollars. We're going to move tranches as we go. We're going to come down. We will have what, $7 million in outstanding debt as of 24. So I mean, we're coming down. We have $15 million in outstanding debt right now. Okay, that a fair number? Where 67 is our number that we can use. So that means we've got 15 out. It's coming down. We've done such great projects. Our sewer project, we're ahead of the game. If I talk to anybody at the county, they're shocked that we have fewer than 105 single-family homes left on sewer. They're going crazy over this stuff. We're doing the right things as a community. We always have. We will. I promise you. I'll be fighting. Look, I'm not leaving this pile of sand unless they drag me off. So I'll be here fighting, and I expect most of you will be too. So we'll be looking out. We'll be making sure that these projects go right and they're done well. And the people we put up on the dais are good people with the best of intentions for this community. So our credit rating will be enhanced. Our flood insurance rating, by the way, as we do these things, will be enhanced. Our flood insurance rates will go down. Our property values will go up.
Can I throw in, before you?
I have to respond to a couple of things. I just disagree with so many things. First place, even if we wanted to, we couldn't start on projects today or tomorrow because there are no projects. There are no plans. The most important project that we have is stormwater. Stormwater has its own separate independent funding mechanism, which is already collecting fees. Stormwater management does not require a penny from this bond at this time. Now, that project has already been started. The next available project, the closest to actually being a reality, is the undergrounding of utilities. Now, the mayor is right. 2+ years ago, he and I were both on the Underground Utility Task Force. We have a master plan. We had estimates. And 2 years ago, the undergrounding of utilities came to a screeching halt. Why? Because council hit upon the problem of how underground utility going to be paid for. Was it going to be paid for an ad valorem method, or was it going to be paid through a special assessment method? Because council did not like the answers that were coming out of all the workshops and that the retained experts were telling them, we stopped dead in our tracks. We could have been 2 years into the future in undergrounding, and we're not. What is going on in undergrounding? Because of the delay of council, we are only now doing a survey of the village, which will take 6+ months to do. And then after that, we have to present that information to FPL for a binding cost estimate of what it will cost to underground. And then only after that will it be able to go out for bid. So we're not talking we're going out to bid within 12 months. We're talking we're going out to bid 1.5 years, 2 years down the road. Forget when we're breaking ground. So I'm sorry, all these rosy projections of all these things that we're ready to do, it's just simply not reality. And all this talk of trust us, we know what we're going to do. That's not good enough either. The people of this village deserve to know what they're paying for, when they're going to pay for it, and better information. We are no less entitled to that than the citizens of Miami Beach were. Yet here we are being told, you don't need that much information. We'll figure it out. We have all these things ready to go, but we don't have that information yet. It'll be down the road. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let me just, there are a couple of very long, basically statements that are not questions. So I'm just going to try to get the essence of what they're asking.
Wait, could I answer that one? I forget what the question was, but I kind of want to respond.
Yeah, no, you can respond. I just want to throw in a couple of things.
What was the question that he was responding to? Or was he just responding to me?
No,
I lost myself.
Responding to you. And,
okay, I'll let him.
Okay. So One of the things that people want a clarification on is where the money comes to pay back the GO bond. And I think you've partly answered, both of you answered that, which has to come out of it's a general obligation bond. It comes out of tax revenues. And if there isn't sufficient tax revenue, then taxes automatically have to go up. If there is sufficient revenue, they don't go up. Then there's another question. Michelle, I don't know if you've have read these thoroughly because they're kind of long. Yeah, the other question was about interest rates, the Fed has said that the interest rates are going to remain very stable until 2024. So that they're asking, that we're at historical low rates. Of course, nobody knows where rates are going.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, GO bonds are almost always cheaper than revenue bonds, even if the terms are the same. When you go out in the public market, they're always because you're pledging the full faith and credit of the village as opposed to revenue streams. So you're going to get a lower rate. Additionally, to my point, just made a little bit ago, if we're going to start waiting on these projects, when we go out to market, the rates will get higher. It will get more expensive as we go on, simply because we're going to be running up against, and this is talking to bonds people, right? I'm not a bond guy. I listen to the experts as much as Ed London hates me doing it. And the bond experts tell me that when we start competing with other municipalities that are putting their bonds out, we're going to have to compete and we're going to have to pay a higher rate. And so I think that's one of the reasons we should be looking to get projects. And again, respectfully, the undergrounding, right now, the next step is to authorize the survey of the village. We had that in front of us and it was postponed, and that's fine. That'll come back. Hopefully we'll do that. We can also use that survey for other areas. Like you mentioned stormwater. I didn't mean stormwater. I said flooding. We've got drainage, we've got roads, we've got roadways. It's the Clean Streets program that we've been talking about. So swales, there's a lot of things that really interplay with the stormwaters, with the undergrounding of utilities. And there are things that have to work together that would be potentially, we could avail ourselves of GOBs to pay for some of those things. You're right. The stormwater, we would use the stormwater rates for. That's absolutely correct. But there are other things tangential that we would use the GOB money for. And again, talking to the experts, we could get the deposit to get the engineer plans. And it'd be 6 to 8 months after that we could go out to bid. But again, when we go out to bid, we need to have a source. So if we really got moving, which I hope we will with the new council seated on November 17th, we can be ready to go in October or November we can go out to bid in October, November of 21 if we decide to do that. But again, that's not the question before. Right? Everybody's going to get to weigh in on this. I want to keep stressing this to people out there. This is about whether or not we should even consider using general obligation bonds. That's what this is about. Do we want to consider using them or not? They are almost always cheaper than revenue bonds when apples are to apples. The costs of revenue bonds and general obligation bonds are the same when you're putting them out to market. It depends on if you're going to banks or you're going out in the public market. So it just makes sense if we're going to do these projects. And I believe Councilmember Segarola, I believe the majority of council are for doing all of these projects, or at least a large number of them. And if we want to do it, why wouldn't we want to finance them in the most responsible way possible?
That's a good segue, because I think we beat up the issue of the financing. There's a question that's raised, a factual question that both of you can address. Whether or not Florida Power and Light is actually already approved, or they have to approve us undergrounding versus what they would do instead to harden, that they can harden without cost to us by putting up those poles, or
Right.
we can underground, but do we need to get permission first from Florida Power and Light?
Yes, we'd have to work with them as council. I'm sorry, Councilmember Segarola,
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah.
No, yes, we'd have to go through a design process with their engineers, and they would have to be a part of the process. Absolutely. It's their lines that they're putting underground. So frankly, I'd want them involved in the process, but yes, they would have to take part in it.
Just a quick explanation. Florida has taken, the entire state has taken the position that we will harden given all the repeated hurricanes that have come our way. In order to further that hardening, the Public Service Commission has allowed the utilities to raise the rates on the entire state to fund it. Now, it is very important to understand what hardening is. Hardening is not undergrounding. Hardening is those huge concrete poles that you see up and down US 1 that don't fall whenever a hurricane comes. FPL will harden Key Biscayne if we don't underground, but they will only harden the main lines, which is basically up and down Crandon and up and down Harbor. The rest of the island, for the most part, stays the same. If we don't want those concrete poles to go up, we have to go ahead and do an undergrounding project. Now, the last estimate for the undergrounding project was approximately $49 million. If we go to FPL and we tell them we want to underground, FPL will give us a credit for how much they would have spent anyways on hardening Key Biscayne towards that total bill. The last estimate that I ever heard of that was about $9 million. So instead of being a $49 million project, it becomes a $40 million project, more or less. But we would still have to pay to underground the vast majority of Key Biscayne. If not, all we get is hardening. And with the undergrounding, you're not just undergrounding utility line, power lines, you're also undergrounding telephone lines, cable lines, all the sort. AT&T will not pay for undergrounding. We have to pay to underground AT&T's lines. We have to pay to underline Comcast or Xfinity's lines or whoever else. So that cost will never go away. But FPL doesn't care if we underground or if we harden, because they're going to do what they need to do anyways. It is up to us whether or not we want to take the next step as a community to underground, and like that will most definitely raise the property values and the investment of everybody on this island. But again, we've been stalled for 2 years on it, and hopefully
But not because of the special assessments.
I completely disagree. There were workshops. There were workshops. We hired an expert who does this nationally. They studied Key Biscayne, and it was a unanimous vote by the Underground Utility Task Force, of which the mayor was on. He was the chairperson, and he voted on it also, that the most equitable manner for paying for the undergrounding of Key Biscayne was through special assessment. Now, after that, things changed. Personally, I pay about the same whether it's special assessment or ad valorem taxes. But that is an issue that I propose should be put forth to the voters. It was completely blocked, and we have been running in place for 2 years on undergrounding, and only now are we going forward to get a vendor to do a survey when we could have been doing this in early 2018. So no, we can't go out to bid in October or November of next year because we haven't even picked a vendor to do the survey.
Okay, I'd like to see if we can begin wrapping this up, but there's another question that was raised, which is, procedural. Since it's clear, I think, to everybody that a general obligation bond is going to be less expensive long-term for infrastructure projects, and that's the proper way to finance infrastructure. Why would the village, let's say, if the bond issue gets defeated in November, doesn't pass in November, that the village couldn't then, analyze the projects, prioritize the projects, put the cost together, and then go for a general obligation bond in the future, since it is the cheapest way to finance. That would be the logical thing that the council could do, and it could do it in 22. Why wouldn't that be an option? That's basically the question.
First of all, let me go first because you went first last time. Or you want to go first?
No, go for it.
So, I mean, first of all, that's what we're doing now. It's before you. We have projects ready to go, and that's why we brought it up. We brought it up because this election is going to have the largest turnout. That's why we're here. That's why we're talking about this. So, I think to go through the process. First of all, we're ready to go with things. I've told you, we are as shovel ready as we can be without having design done, and we need to know what our funding source is going to be. And to go out to bid, you need your funding source locked in. You need to know how you're funding. To do a bid, you have to have the funds allocated. That's under Section 307 of our charter. So if you look at that, what you do now is, let's say we get our numbers together we'll have them together shortly, right? We'll have them by 21. Well, now we got to wait a year. Well, now numbers change, right? Everything starts to shift. Now it's just an inefficient way for us to have to go out on each project for a geo bond. Not only is there additional costs and education, and now you're trying to get people on each project. Now you have people voting on each project. It's not the way to run a railroad, frankly. It's representative democracy is representative democracy. If you need to trust the people you put up here, and you need to get us to let us do what we spend a lot of time studying. I mean, the reason undergrounding hasn't gone forward, first of all, was because FB&L, we thought they were going to be the source. We thought they were going to pay a larger share. We thought we might be a pilot program. Those are the real reasons we were delayed for so long. Again, especially, this is not about whether or not we'll do any type. I'm not for special assessments necessarily, but there's no reason. We will investigate each and every way and figure out what's the best way. But if we're excluding one of the ways we might pay for it, we're hamstringing ourselves. We're cutting our own throats in a way. And I don't think that's the right way to proceed. So.
Okay, Ignacio, and then there's one last question where I want to wrap this up in about 10 minutes so that you guys can either do closing statements.
I completely agree with the premise of the person who asked the question, that there is absolutely nothing stopping us from doing that, which would be the right way, which is exactly what Miami Beach did. Miami Beach did their studies, did their investigations, came up with their estimates, identified individual projects, all before asking for the bond, a bond that was more than 4 times larger than what we're asking for now. If Miami Beach can do it, there's no reason why we can't do it for much smaller projects than what they're facing. There's absolutely no reason why we should settle for anything less. I'm going to give a little plug. A few hours ago, I read on the Islander, they posted a letter to the editor from one of our residents, Ricardo Martinez. I urge everyone to look on the Islander website and read that letter, because it basically shows everything that we're doing wrong in this referendum and everything we should be doing to go forward the right way to get these projects done. A little while ago, the mayor asked me if I'm against the projects. I'm not against any of the projects. I'm just in favor of doing the projects the right way. I want the information. I think the residents and the voters deserve the information. Then the opposite is, we've heard the mayor say today during this talk, oh, we could use the money for that, or we could use the money for this, or we could use the money for whatever. That's the whole point. We don't know what the money it can be used for. It can be used for anything, only at the whim of council. And that is simply the wrong way to go forward on this.
Okay, so we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions. I think we've covered, I'm trying to look to make sure we're not repeating things. Michelle, help me here if you see something that I've missed.
In general, reading them, that there are a couple of people that they have asked related to the bistro nourishment, that why we are talking, bistro nourishment specifically when we are supposed to get funding from the government and corp engineers and all that. That's a couple of questions related to that.
Let me be clear. I've been working my butt off, as have council members Petros, McCormick, and Moss, going to Washington, going to Jacksonville, meeting with people, working hard to get us involved and incorporated into the Army Corps of Engineers study. And we're doing everything we can so we don't have to pay that money. But what you do is you plan. You make sure you have a plan of action in case we don't get in the study, in case we don't get funded by the Army Corps of Engineers. We've been disappointed on funding sources before. And so I think we have to plan for that possible eventuality. Again, we're not committing ourselves to any bonds by approving the consideration of general obligation bonds. We're not committing ourselves to anything beyond saying, okay, now if we have a project, we can consider general obligation bonds. That's all this is about. Hopefully, and I had a really good call with Congresswoman Shalala today. It sounds like we're moving in the right direction, but I'm not, until the fish is in the boat, you don't count it as caught. So we're going to keep looking at what we need to do to make sure we are seeing what we have to do to fund these projects if we need to go on our own, because these are critical projects to Key Biscayne. Now, I will take exception to one thing that Councilmember Segarola said. He said that mayor just, I'm saying, oh, we could do this, we could do that. We have very strict areas of focus for the general obligation bonds. mitigating floodwaters, shoreline protection, and hardening our infrastructure. Those are the 3 areas. They're very specific. And this whole nonsense, I think there's one candidate who said, what if they put a statue of a manatee in the middle of the village green? Well, frankly, that's not a hard, that's not something we could do with geo bonds, because certainly I would fight that 100%. But let me say this, if the council decided to put a statue of a, I think I froze. If the council decided they wanted to put a statue of a manatee in the village green and they wanted to take out debt, you know what? We could technically do it right now with revenue bonds. So, let's be clear. The people you're putting up on this dais, they're not frivolous. I'm sorry. I know there's disagreement. We work hard. The people that I serve with work hard. They care about this community. I know a lot of you have been involved for a long time. You've cared about this community. I want to see the best done for this village. I know everybody who's been elected wants to do the best. And I expect that the next council and the council after that and the council after that will be people we select because they want what's best for the village of Key Biscayne.
I have to ask Fausto if there's an area or a question that we haven't addressed. And then Ignacio, you can reply.
Let Ignacio go first, please.
Yeah, I don't think I answered that question. Well, and
Oh, you did.
Michelle,
No, you're not.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
It's about beach renourishment. Why would we do?
Michelle.
Okay. Beach renourishment. Yes.
Okay. You're muted, Michelle.
That is a very good question. I disagree with the mayor. I think, why get yourself into debt if you don't know if you need to yet, especially when there is no beach renourishment project by the village waiting immediately and needs these funds now. There is nothing to lose by waiting until 2022. And I disagree also with the mayor that I haven't spoken to bond experts, but I just don't foresee that there's suddenly going to be such a huge capital crunch in this country by municipalities all running out to lenders asking for money at the same time, running the rates up. I also suspect that after this financial crisis that we're going to, the federal government's going to open up the coffers and offer some pretty interesting aid packages to municipalities and people that we can benefit from. So if we're speculating, I'd rather speculate on that before I start spending our own money. In the end, maybe I'm just too old-fashioned. I don't like getting into debt before I need to get into debt. I think we need to analyze, plan, issue timelines for these actual projects, because I would like to point out, none of these speculative projects have any actual real timelines. It's just discussions and wish lists and those things. So to the person who asked the question, I agree with you. We need to wait and see if we get into the Army Corps of Engineers project before we start saying, oh, we need to get a credit line for that. Oh, and if we get into it and we don't need to spend the money, don't worry, we got the money to spend on something else that'll occur to us down the road.
Before we continue, Fausto, do you have any area that you wanted to highlight?
I actually have a question for the mayor as well as the councilman. And
sure.
So, Mayor, quick question is, the projects that we're discussing essentially are in very broad categories. But nothing specific except for the undergrounding right now.
Right.
And so we have broad categories. So what is the process, or will there be a process for other projects to be considered within the sustainability category?
Well, I think we're under consideration right now. We are about to start a survey, right, with KCI. Hopefully we'll approve it in the next few meetings. And that will sort of lead to what are we going to do in terms of clean streets? How are we going to incorporate both stormwater, which is not what I'm talking about for GOB, hardening of our infrastructure, and drains and roadway improvements that are going to help with flooding. At the same time, we are working, Moffett and Nichols has given us some ideas about what we can do in terms of offshore breakers to slow the erosion of our beaches. We're lined up, I believe, through 21 for our beach renourishment programs, but we need to plan for 24. And we need to be making plans as we go in the future. Are there things that may come up? There may be that may be included under our plan. We have a lot of things we've been talking about, but but a lot of things are going to depend on how we bring things together. We need a cohesive, we're putting together a plan and we're ready to go on a lot of things. We just need to start working them together. But I think there's, you know, I don't want to say it depends, but it always depends. It depends on how we're going to roll things out. And that's going to be a decision council will make with an incredible amount of public input.
Let me do a follow-up, and then I have a question for Ignacio.
Wait,
Okay.
do I answer that question too, or no?
Sure, please. Please.
Honestly, you just heard the mayor. We don't know. We're putting the cart before the horse. We're asking for the money before we have any idea what the procedure or the process is going to be. We just don't know. If you ask me, we're being lazy. We're asking for the money before we put in the work to justify why we want the money. And when I say we, I mean the village. I don't understand, and I know I sound like a broken record, but why can the city of Miami Beach do this in 9 months, and all we've done is ask for $100 million, which is almost 300% of our annual budget, and had a few workshops where we discuss wish list items. That's all we've done. We have not done the groundwork to justify asking the voters for this money. So what is the process and the procedure? To be determined, because right now we don't know.
That's not fair, but continue, please.
Fausto, go ahead.
And Ignacio, ultimately, what the bond is a funding mechanism right now.
Right.
The contours of what the money is going to be spent on have not been defined. So my question to you is, why oppose a funding mechanism? And what is the process, which is what I tried to ask the mayor, subsequently after the funding mechanism is approved, to identify the projects, move forward with them? What is the level of staff that's going to be required in the village? Do we have that staff or we don't have that staff? So, but the bottom line is, if what we're simply approving is a funding mechanism, why the debate?
The answer is in your question. The parameters of this funding mechanism are too undefined. They are too broad. In my opinion, that is a danger. Like I said before, anything could have a resiliency, quote unquote, component plugged into it, and the GEO bonds justified for their use. That is not best practices. That is not the right way of doing things. That's just my opinion. Maybe I'm too strict. It's up to the voters to decide. Now, you asked a very interesting second part to your question, which has to do with the village's ability to manage the projects, if you ask me. As it stands, I do not believe we have the personnel or the administration to manage the scope of projects that is being potentially envisioned by this bond. We're going to have to greatly increase the personnel in our public works, and we're going to have to hire an assistant manager and who knows what else to be able to manage all these potential construction projects that we're talking about. People are already complaining about the village administration growing too big. So what happens when you have to hire additional people? That's a problem. Now, we're talking about all these potential projects, and I would just like to lay something out. If you ask me, I'm not sure these potential projects are actually viable. Why? Because stormwater that we're going to start construction on soon, you're talking a project that is going to improve stormwater all around the village. If and when undergrounding becomes ready in 3 or 4 years to break ground, stormwater will fall into undergrounding, but it will be a much larger project that we will have continuous construction throughout this village for approximately 7 to 8 years. That is what the master plan for undergrounding of utilities projected. And that's if everything goes right. So basically, you're going to have the entire village under construction for a 7 to 8 year period for both stormwater improvements and underground utilities. You simply don't have the manpower in the administration to run additional construction projects, and you don't have space in the village for additional construction equipment. Forget everything else. So all of this is just all for naught. Worst case scenario, we're going to have complete gridlock from construction if we start spending money on additional projects. We already have our hands full with stormwater and undergrounding for easily 8 years. I think we need to work on what we have, and then, as an aside, come up with a timeline for additional projects, prioritize them, try to figure out how we can work them into existing projects, and responsibly move forward from there. And at that time, we can ask for a general obligation bond, once we know what we're actually going to be doing.
Hey, Ignacio, if it's okay with you.
Let me make one final comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Fausto.
Let me just thank the mayor and council member. What we're seeing basically is an educated, measured sort of difference of opinion, but without the vitriol and without the unharmony that we see in our national politics and in other communities. And I think that's a credit to both of them, and it's a credit to the village of Key Biscayne and the residents of the village of Key Biscayne. So as a citizen of the village, I thank you both for participating in this event and in the fashion that you participate.
Likewise, Fausto, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we heard this is countless hours from both Mike Davey and Ignacio Segurola. I consider both of them good friends as well. So they're really both of them working for the best of the village every day, inside out. So I cannot thank them enough. Now, while in this particular case, they don't agree, they do agree that both of them look for the best in the village, and they really put a lot of hours and efforts together honestly, for the benefit of the community overall. So really, Mike and Ignacio, thank you very much for everything you do, really. And I speak not just by myself, but also on behalf of many residents and voters in the island. No? Good job.
Yeah, but we don't want to end it, so please continue.
Yes.
Yeah, this conversation will have to continue. And again, I want to thank you, Mike, for having joined us, and Ignacio for joining us, and all the people who have joined us and stuck with us all this time. This is going to be the beginning of a series of different educational type topics. As you can see, this is a very difficult topic, and it's controversial. Just for clarification, the Key Biscayne Condominium President's Council has not taken a position on the GO bond. It's up to each individual association, and even within that, probably they're going to leave it up to just their individual residents and owners to decide, based on the information they've received. And the purpose of this meeting was to just get the information out there, let people listen to both sides, and make up their own minds of how they feel about this. And so let's have a quick summary, and we'll end, because I promised Fausto that this would not run more than an hour, and we're into an hour and a half, which has been very, very interesting.
Yeah, but he said that he doesn't want this to be end, so it's okay.
It's actually one of the most productive forums that we have had in Key Biscayne with regards to GeoBond.
Yes, you're right. You're correct, Fausto. I have a lot of people that they have joined us, and they have my cell number, and I have received, believe it or not, 11 messages saying that this has been one of the best information and meetings that they have participated, or thank you for having it. So thank you both.
Okay, I'm sorry, if I can chime in a second, not as a council member, as a condo president. I thank you, Fausto, and thank you, Tony, and thank you, Michelle and Javier. This has been fantastic. If I may make a suggestion before we move on to our closing statements. The longer I've been here and seeing all the people participating, I think this is fantastic. As a condo president's council building member, I would suggest that in the future we consider opening up meetings to single family homes village-wide, because I think this could be a fantastic forum for everyone to exchange ideas. We keep talking about one village, and like I said, Zoom lets us all be one village and all talk.
Yeah, by the way, we did send out invitations to people village-wide. Our list may not be the strongest, other than the condominiums, but more than 900 invitations went out. We had 127 people register, and at the height we had 84 people participating. So it was a very successful event. And yes, we want to do more of these for the entire village on this and other topics. I mean, we just barely scratched the surface on the individual projects and the importance of these infrastructure projects for the village, which we all agree that are important. So
good. Glad we're all on tape.
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you for, for everything. Ignacio, you go first, just a 2-minute summary each, 3-minute summary, I think is sufficient. And
Yeah, I think we've close to talked this to death. Actually, probably
Yeah.
not. We probably stay here for hours.
Right.
But Mike and I disagree.
Years, I think we would.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Mike and I disagree. This has been a very good exchange of ideas. It is what it is. We are both fighting for the best future for the village. That's, I think, why we both represent our positions as spiritedly as possible. Simply put, I mean, I wrote about it in the Islander. We've discussed it tonight. I'm not for this go bond. I'm not against go bonds in general. I think this is a textbook example of how not to ask for a go bond. I asked the village of Key Biscayne, the voters, to reject the go bond and allow us to continue on the path to do it the right way. Whether in 2 years, we could very much be in a position where we could all intelligently come up with a plan, come up with projects, come up with estimates, and revisit this issue. That's it. It's that simple. There's no reason to rush into this now without knowing what we're getting into, creating such a flawed mechanism where things could easily go off the rails. That's my position. Please vote no on the bond. That's it.
Ignacio, thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, you have the last word.
Thank you, Ignacio. Look, the question again, it's not about incurring debt off this vote. This vote does nothing but allow us another vehicle with which to finance projects as we move along. We've had a lot, and I realize a lot of people are coming in a bit late. I get that. They haven't really been paying attention to the town halls and everything that's gone on undergrounding, on stormwater, on flooding mitigation, on beaches. And now this is great because I think that what this election has done is it's brought it to the forefront for a lot of people. But the things have been going on for years and years, and we have a lot of information, and we're moving forward. We're just at a point where we have to make a decision how we're going to finance things. And this go bonds are just a better way of financing. Councilmember Cigarella brought up funding from the federal government. If we get that, guess what? I'm going with the federal government paying for it. But if we don't, we've got to be prepared to do these projects. Go bonds are cheaper than revenue bonds, head to head, apples to apples. That's just a fact. What you're voting on is whether or not we should be allowed as a council to consider them. I ask you to trust your council to do the right thing. I ask you to watch and pay attention when we're doing when these projects are coming up for votes, or when they're coming up for charrettes or workshops or town halls. Get involved, come out, voice your concerns, voice your opinions, and we're going to come together as a community and get things done. But we've got to get going now, and having the opportunity to investigate go bonds as we move along, that's the way to do it. We're doing it the right way. We've been doing it the right way. This village has always done things the right way. This is the time. Vote for the go bonds. Remember that Alan Fine put a pro bond article in the paper in the Islander as well. So we've got counterpoints, and that's a good thing here on Key Biscayne. And let's keep this. This was civil tonight. I really appreciate it with Ignacio, but I'd like to see more of this from the folks who are running for council. Let's keep to the issues. Let's stick to it. Let's be a community. Let's come out of this on the other side. Remember, we all are going to live here on November 4th, and we're all going to have to live together. All right. Thanks, everybody. Be safe. Have a great night.
Michael, thank you very much. Ignacio, thank you very much. Panelists, thank you very much. Javier, terrific job. And by the way, remember, we're going to have a future meeting with Javier going into a lot more detail about how we look as a village and so on, which is there's really fascinating slides to look forward to. When you after we close, you should be receiving an email. And there's a very short little survey, 3 points. You can do it in 15 seconds just to get some feedback on the meeting and what you thought. So I appreciate everybody attending, and look forward to the next one. And Michelle, thank you so much for all your help.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. And Javier, thank you for the great data.
Yes. Thanks.
Always. Always.
Right, thank
Okay,
you.
good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.